Ladies and gentlemen, am I okay? Good evening and a warm welcome to all of you to what is the grand finale of the India Illuminated Week. It is truly an honor and a pleasure for me that a program of this nature was conceptualized and finally executed. For many of us who live in India and who have a strong relationship with Australia and, in our particular case, with UNSW, this was a unique event because it's never happened in the history of UNSW. It's also a unique event because it's never happened in the history of any university relationship in Australia with India. And it is part of an extraordinary new initiative taken by UNSW called the India Strategy. The India Strategy really was, when I was approached many years ago, a couple of years ago, on being part of this journey, what I was told was that for every 360 Indian students who join UNSW annually, approximately 1,400 Chinese students join UNSW annually. And this happened really because over time, a great investment took place through a China strategy. The time was right because now the China strategy has taken firm roots and the time is right to expand and build the next pillar. And that next pillar was the India strategy. And in November of last year, when the President and Vice Chancellor of UNSW, Professor Ian Jacobs, visited India, he spoke about something called the Diya initiative. Diya means light in the Indian language. And there is, you would recall, that with China, there is a project called Torch. And Diya was very similar to Torch because it had to do with light. And light in the Indian philosophical traditions, if you like, has various meanings. India illuminated, for instance, metaphors with the word light. And the diya is an earthen lamp which is lit, symbolizing light. Light is basically knowledge. But delved deeper, light is education. And delved even deeper, it is the distinction between sight and insight. And that's part of what we call the Eastern philosophical traditions. So this India strategy and the Diya initiative combined together, UNSW has invested hugely in trying to build clientele and build ownership within the university, within Sydney, within Australia, on the India story. You might well ask and therefore understand as to why India Illuminated is being held here and not in India. It's purely to bring this ownership out. As part of this program, we close with a panel discussion. And I have some of the most outstanding people that we could think of. What you have with you on your chair are the biodata, the detailed biodata of everyone. So I don't want to go through the biodata in detail with each and every one of you, and I will take the liberty of speaking about them while they respond to a query. I'm told, ladies and gentlemen, that this program is being recorded as it's likely to be broadcast on Sky News. So you must ask very meaningful questions, and we hope everyone's going to give very meaningful answers. But let me start with, and the whole subject is to be able to ask ourselves fundamentally, where does the future of India-Australia relations lie? It's like asking, is there a future in India-Australia relations? I'll start with the youngest member in the panel, Laurie, who is a student at the School of Business of UNSW. I first met Laurie a couple of months ago when she, along with a group of about 21 students, visited the city of Mumbai under the new Colombo plan, which, as Neville mentioned yesterday, for those of you who may not have been here, is an extraordinary departure from, for want of a better word, the old Colombo plan, or the earlier Colombo plan. And in this Colombo plan, people from Australia actually go and visit other countries, learn and imbibe and experience other cultures. And as part of that, Laurie and 20 other students from the School of Business visited. But she said something extraordinary to me when I spoke to her while she was there. And I'd like her to talk about it because it was her first visit to India, her very first visit to Mumbai. So Laurie, when you visited, before you left, what were your feelings? And what were your feelings while you were there? And what do you feel about your visit now? You might wish to put on the mic.
Before I left to go to Mumbai, I told Amit this. I was at the airport and I felt so anxious that I was physically ill. And I actually told my parents who were there with me, don't let me get on that flight. We should turn around, put the suitcase back in the car and leave, because I was so anxious as I was getting my boarding pass at the counter. And my dad kind of turned around and told me, you paid for your ticket and you're going. That's that. So that experience there, that anxiety, it was built up in the months before I had gotten to that point where every time I told someone that I was going to spend a month in Mumbai, they kind of looked at me in shock, and their reaction was, why are you doing that? Like, why would you go? And they proceeded to tell me a lot of stories that they had heard and a lot of misperceptions they had about India and how it might be unsafe for me to go, how I might not enjoy my experience. And so I guess a combination of those really informed how I felt right before I left. And I think it's really easy to kind of blanket an entire community with those misperceptions. And what I found when I went to India is most of those were completely untrue. I think the biggest thing for me for overcoming those was to get out of my comfort zone and actually recognize those fears that I had as irrational, and actually thinking about where those fears came from and thinking about the people who caused those fears within me hadn't actually ever been to India. They'd never experienced what I was experiencing. But in their minds, they believed that that was the truth about Mumbai. So I guess the biggest thing for me was getting there and realizing that it's not what everyone says, it's so much more. And I guess the biggest misperception I had was that I would be unsafe. The first couple of days, I was told not to leave the hotel by myself, not to do anything by myself, to always have a group of people surrounding me. And I guess the biggest change towards the end of that trip was being able to step outside and have no fear. I mean, I'd just be as cautious as I was in Sydney. So I think that was the biggest change while on the trip. And at the end, I want to go back and experience more, which is not something I thought I would do when I first started.
easier if I speak from here. Um, would it be okay for me to say, Laurie, that the perceptions you had about India were misperceptions?
I think so. I guess the perceptions of the place being, dirty or crowded, I guess they're true in some ways, but it's how you look at that situation and how you see the people there instead of what's physically around you, because it's the people, in my experience, which really, I didn't have any expectations of who I would meet, but the people that I did meet were what made my experience how amazing that it actually was. And yeah, I think, yeah.
Thanks, Laurie. But let me introduce Varun. Varun, who's just visited, just visiting. He just come from Melbourne. I think it's the first visit to Melbourne, first visit to Australia. As I told Varun, that apart from that lovely drive along the coast, Sydney is a much better place. But having said that, since it's your first visit, what impressions did you come with? What kind of feeling and sentiment are you feeling now? It's very difficult to talk about how we feel in a couple of days' time, but what was your view and perception about Australians and Australia before you came here?
So yeah, so whenever you go to a new place, so this was I come from Mumbai, so just like Laurie, when she was going to Mumbai, she had some impressions which were based on the negative stereotypes we have of a new place, which is what happens. I feel the negative stereotypes always get more amplification than the positive stereotypes, because somehow I think fear is a bigger emotion than any other emotion right now in the world. And so we kind of we become slightly wary, or we look for those signs instead of looking for what is good in a new country. So slightly similar for me, though. I've been to some other countries, to the west, not to the east of India, and every time there is this, I would say, as an Indian, as a brown person, there is this long shadow of racism, which you always, that's the first fear I have as an Indian traveling to any Western country, say Europe, to or Canada, or this time to Australia, and there have been some, again, as negative stereotypes get amplified. So there were some attacks on Indian students. Again, when I came here, I spoke to some friends who have been here for 10 years, 15 years, and they said, again, those were like, sometimes those were minor incidents which were amplified because of the news cycle which plays on fear, and the Indian media overreacted sometimes, probably. Again, I don't know the truth, but that was the perception which I had, and that was the only element of fear in my mind, that whether, because racism, again, it's not about what somebody does to you, it's about how safe you feel, and feeling is mostly an abstract thing. But since coming here, and it's been only 3 days in Australia for me, so again, it's not a very empirical feeling, but still I can say that there's no shred of racism I could feel. So I felt very welcome here. People are very open, very cheerful. They don't, something which I felt in one country. I won't go into the name of the country, but you could feel the moment somebody looks at you. There's that element of you can spot the color of your skin in that person's eyes. So that's something which is not happening here. So which is great. Apart from that, I feel something which is very uh, which is a very new paradigm in the world right now, which is because of social media, because of we are always connected to the world. So there is a shared emotion all around the world about certain things. Like, I knew about the same-sex marriage vote, which is going to, take place here, and uh, as an Indian, I was as concerned about it, or a group of people who in India who are, say, artists, and we were concerned about, and we were hoping, and we are still hoping that this goes the yes way and all that. So that was something which, the moment I came to Australia, so I had some image about the country, apart from what the National Geographic pictures and the news cycle, something which concerns me as a person, which is, okay, there is something, a liberal movement is going on, and maybe it will go the way the world needs right now. So something like that. So I think that element kind of also makes a new place familiar, because the concerns of the place are the same as your concerns.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that you said, because I must confess that many years ago I was in Sydney and in Australia around the time when the attacks on the Indian students took place. And I maintained then, and I maintain now, most categorically, that it was not at all a racist attack. I maintained then, and I maintain now, that the attacks were a law and order issue. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and God knows it happens in India as well. But the media in India did play an extraordinary role in actually determining perceptions. And in your case, as you're mentioning, it determined a misperception, and it allowed it to entrench itself. And it's only when you visited that you were able to shift the way you are actually looking at people. I confess, you've been here just 3 days, 4 days, it's not sufficient empirical evidence. But I believe that in our system today, very often the way we see things, the way we think, is so externally determined. And then we believe it's true. One of the things, nevertheless, for people who live for a very long time in a country, who become, if you like, migrants, how are they accepted? Or how are they not accepted? This is something that I thought I would request Roanna to talk about. Roanna is the author of a book which has received significant acclaim. It's called The Permanent Resident, a selection of stories where she actually explores the lives of the migrants. I'm not saying migrants from all communities across the world, but I think there are shared experiences, shared aspirations, perhaps shared fears. So Roanna, would you like to tell us a little bit about your book, a little bit about how we can connect what Laurie said? First experience in India starts with a worry, then feels perhaps that's not all true. But then there will always be elements of truth. I mean, India is a poor country. God knows it is poor. And no one's going to hide that. But the relationship with people, the same thing with Varun, comes with a set of experiences. And I hope you continue to meet with positive experiences. What happens? What is perceptions? How do migrants feel about it?
Thanks, Amit, and hi, everyone. I'm Roanna, and this is my book of short stories. It's called The Permanent Resident. I was actually struck by what both Laurie and Varun said about having these really negative perceptions before they came here, but it's only by talking to people, by connecting with other human beings that there is a possibility for change. And I think there's something about that, and there's something about this sense of future that this relationship between Australia and India, we talk about, is there a future? What's the future of Australia, the Australia-India relationship? And I think we have a future because we have a past. I think the relationship between Australia and India stretches back geologically for billions of years. Amit was talking earlier about how the two continents were joined at the hip, you know. We were all one landmass, and so geologically, there are those vestigial, I guess, connections and ties that still remain and that are manifest not only in the flora and fauna, but also in the people of Australia and of India, the indigenous people here and the indigenous people of India and the other. We're a country of old migrants, as they say in India. So all those connections, I think as an immigrant, understanding that actually people like us have been here for a long time, not just the last 2 decades, but there are deeper connections. For me, that sense anchors us, I feel. You know, history is like an anchor for us in a new place. And for the characters in my stories as well, it's kind of remembering that sort of history that is what gives us strength as immigrants, I feel, and helps us project into the future because we're strongly anchored in a past that stretches back millennia.
That's a very interesting point you made, Rana, because if we are really looking at where does the future lie in the relationship, and we're talking about a situation where not every Indian has visited Australia. I dare say not every Australian is going to visit India. And so how do you craft a future based on perceptions? And if the perceptions are misperceptions, is there a future?
There is a future, but you have to change the story, I think. And I think there's a lot of connection between Australia and India in the STEM areas, you know, science, technology, engineering, medicine, and that's all wonderful. We need the sciences to live, to keep us alive. But then after we're alive and breathing, what do? We tell stories, we see movies, we talk to each other, and for that you need the arts. And so that's why I think we need to think about, you know, this relationship between Australia and India. What is the story we're trying to tell? And I think thinking about it as story, that's where I think the one direction, there is potential in that, I think.
I wanted to draw in Monica. Monica is a professor at UNSW, does significant work in the area of foreign and security policy. So if we're talking about the relationship between two countries, it's actually a relationship then of people in those countries. But is the relationship something that should be people-driven, or should it be government-driven? And if it is people or government-driven, what is that single point that attracts everyone? What is the area of convergence? Is it an issue that brings people closer together or distances people? How would you see it through the years of experience that you've had studying how relationships are actually crafted to be able to put it down and understand it? Because at the end of the day, I suppose what we're trying to do is understanding whether there is a future, and if there isn't, why not? And if there is, where is it?
Thanks, Amit. You have to remember that governments are made up of people also. At the end of the day, people forget, right? Yeah. We think government states are these living, breathing, reified things, but they are made up of people, and people like, like you. I don't think any relationship can be solely government-driven. To give a simpler answer to your question, I think people can drive relationships even in contexts where there isn't a lot of government initiative in the first place. And of course, if there is both happening at the same time, then that's a really great situation for everyone. I think quite often, even those who work in governments, as qualified and efficient as they may be, fail to take the time to understand the people who are on the other side, even at the government level. And quite often, we make assumptions about the other without necessarily taking the time to try and understand the context within which those others operate, the historical context, the cultural contexts. Last year, I was a part of a meeting with the Australian High Commissioner to India at the moment, and I asked whether she thinks there is adequate understanding on the part of Australian diplomats with respect to what's happening in India and how Indian government officials think, how Indian foreign and security policy operates within those broader contexts. And she agreed that that's actually a really important part of engaging with India and likewise India engaging with Australia. So to go back to your original question around whether it should be people-driven or government-driven, I think the answer comes back to how well do we understand each other. And that will inform any kind of engagement that you might have, whether at the people-to-people level or at the government level.
Let me just pursue this a little bit more with you, Monica. What, in your view, very undiplomatically put by me, is the level of interest Indians have on Australia or Australians have on India? I mean, why would each of these two countries, either of these two countries, invest time in knowing about each other? Why? And if you feel that they have an interest, what evidence do you have of the kind of interest that they have? Because there's something I heard the other day, was that India and Australia discover each other every 20 years. I don't know if it's true or false, but I would have said 30 years, because it took 30 years for an Indian Prime Minister to actually visit Australia, didn't it? So is there really an interest in getting to know about each other?
I would say there is, and there definitely is increasingly so. There is increasing interest in trying to understand one another more and at different levels. The world we live in, governments change and political will ebbs and flows and priorities shift. So what one government prioritizes may not be another government's priority, as you well know, Amit. But I think there are many factors that actually are fueling that interest in India, on the Australian side certainly, and that is obviously the fact that India is one of the largest sources of migrants to Australia now, and we have this really robust growing community that obviously Rohanna's picked up on in her book as well. And the more we hear one another, the more we want to understand one another, the more there are sort of community ties across the seas, the more there is scope to actually engage with one another in more concrete ways. I guess the best example I can give you is my work with the Australia-India Youth Dialogue, which actually was established at the time when you were consul at the consulate in Sydney. And the Australia-India Youth Dialogue was established purely for the purpose of establishing people-to-people links between Australia and India at the youth level, so that we could actually create friendships in the first instance, just friendships, relationships between young emerging leaders in India and young emerging leaders in Australia, so that as the relationship progresses, if ever there were to be moments of crisis, there would actually exist those solid understandings between the two countries that could withstand those shocks. But at the same time, to actually open up opportunities for collaboration and working together on problems of mutual significance in ways that benefit both countries. So certainly in the 7 years since the dialogue started, the interest in engaging in or being part of that platform has skyrocketed on both sides.
You are an excellent advocate of India-Australia bilateral relations, but let me turn to Neville. Neville Roach has been in Australia for several years. He's a person of great experience and distinction, and I wanted to ask Neville is if we try to stitch what Monica is saying, what Rohanna is saying, what Laurie introduced us to along with Varun, with regard to perceptions at one end, entrenching perceptions, with regard to migrants, and what I feel, Monica, to a significant in a significant manner, tried to convey was that there is a strategic interest which actually drives a relationship. And when you find that strategic interest, the relationship flourishes. Would you say that there is something that migrants bring to Australia, either in terms of making it multicultural, in terms of contributing to the GDP? What is it that migrants really bring that could allow for this strategic convergence?
Thanks, Amit, and good evening, everyone. Laurie, I have to say, when I listened to you, with a bit of a nervous feeling about going to Mumbai. I come from Mumbai, by the way, and I'm glad you liked it. Well, I could relate to that, and I don't think about it a lot anymore, but every now and then I go back to 1961, when I was 22, being sent out here on a 4-year assignment, where it was impossible to expect to go back except at the end of the 4 years because you couldn't afford to and companies didn't pay for them. And I was coming to white Australia. I wasn't afraid that I didn't feel, but I was leaping into the unknown, and perhaps I was just a bit naive and didn't think it through. But and leaving parents at that time was much, much harder because you never knew whether you'd see them alive again, because 4 years is a long time in the getting on. So as things have turned out, I'm still here. And in a sense, I guess my journey, what Australia has changed dramatically from the Australia I came to. Australia that I came to was white Australia, and that by white Australia I meant the immigration policy was white Australia. I didn't sense a racist attitude towards people from India. Now, there were very few of us here. When we went to Adelaide, we were told there were 26. And when we joined, it became 28, and when our son was born, it became 29. So, but that gives you some sense of how rare we were, and that perhaps was a big advantage because we tended to be treated as people who were special. People in Adelaide had never seen a woman in a sari before, and as I've said in other forum, no one adorns a sari as much as my wife does. Of course, Mala does too. But it was something that it was part of an exotic, different thing with an affection towards India, formed of empire, formed of other things that happened. And then from that point, where we had a white Australia policy, Australia has moved to a policy of and white Australia meant people from Britain and Ireland, basically. And then we changed to look for Europeans, large numbers from Southern Europe, Italy, Greece, and so on. And then from 1967 onwards, we abandoned the white Australia policy and totally put it in the past, which Coughlin did in the early 70s. So that journey from white Australia to multicultural Australia is, I guess, I feel part of that because I came here when one started, and I came here when the other, and I've still been here when the others have been achieved. And that's, and I was lucky to be involved with that particular movement, with multiculturalism, and advise on that, immigration. The thing about relationships, they can be on many levels. You can be business relationships. They can be all about money. And there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of people become very wealthy by trading. But I think ultimately the most powerful relationships are about people and how people get on with each other and the extent to which we respect each other and value each other. And that, I think, is where Australia is doing exceptionally well with getting migrants, particularly from the Asian region, in abundance. The value that they bring to this country, I don't think is ever appreciated enough. We really need, I've always felt that we should have a research project where we said, how much is a migrant worth to this country? And, and if you added that up, it would go into trillions. Because, but we don't have that I'm aware of, a study which actually says when we make it difficult for parents of migrants to come here, make them pay exorbitant sums to bring their parents here. We don't have, what is the value that the migrant couple has? What is the value that children will have? What are the value that the parents will bring? And we want to charge them $50,000 to come here, make their children happier, more productive, and so. But that's what we do. So we, I think, neglect that people-to-people relationship. And in relation to India, we are lucky we're getting vast numbers of people. Students are returning, thanks to work that people like Amit did to keep a lid on the problems when they arose. And we've recovered from that, and they're coming back. But what do we do to help them? What do we do to value them? What do we do to exploit is a word in a positive sense, to get maximum value from them? I don't think we do much at all. When migrants used to come here, they were given assisted passages. The proverbial 10-pound palm is one we all know, and any number of people, thousands and thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of them came here. When we brought in migrants from Europe to work on the Snowy Mountain scheme, again, they came here on subsidized travel. They were welcomed here, they were put up in accommodation, there was a good neighbor policy to befriend them and look after them. Yes, it wasn't a perfect policy, the hostels were difficult places to live in, but they were expected, the only thing bad with that policy was they were expected to assimilate. And assimilation meant, in a phrase that became common at that time, was speak English, you wog. And some of you here would have remembered those days, and it was dangerous for people to talk to each other in their language. They could get punched and told, speak English, you wog. We've moved past that now. We went into integration. We saw these European migrants. They had something to offer. They dressed better than we did, and they ate infinitely better than we did. And we started a thing of integration. So that meant people became more and more taking things from each other, but still coming up with a composite uniformity. And then we went into multiculturalism, which for the first time says diversity is a good thing, we should value it. And a committee that I chaired, we brought in the word Australian multiculturalism, which looked at the Australian essence, the nature of the host community, the way they had adapted to us coming here. And we said, from now on, you've got to value diversity because it is an asset, it is a very precious asset. We've stopped doing that, in my opinion. So the relationship between Australia and India should be built around its people. We should be doing more to get the best students to come here. We should be more to make people feel at home here. We should be using them in every way we can to build a relationship with India. And for example, students who come here bring a massive number of tourists into this country. I'm told 4 people come here a year for every student that we have here from overseas. What do we do to encourage those students to see Australia? Do we organize tours for them? Do we give them subsidized travel? Go and see the Hunter Valley, go to Cairns. When their parents come here, their families come here, they're going to say, we've got to go there, we've been there, and it's been brilliant. We don't do anything like that. So I think the work we have to do is, along the people front, is very, very much underdone. And we must do that. And just finally, in terms of Australians relating to India, this is non-Indian Australians, the first thing I say that anyone who wants to have anything to do with India is you've got to go there. And because, and I tell people that you can be sure that you will be overwhelmed. Whether you would be overwhelmed for good or overwhelmed for bad, if your experience is either, honestly, it doesn't matter because it will be your own experience of India. It won't be a stereotypical, hackneyed, colonial view of India which the British developed and which Australians inherited from the British. You have to form your own opinion, and then you've got to decide, we want to do business with these, we want to go there again, and your business will do better because you've already made that significant step forward of working with people in India and valuing the people of India. So I think it's in many ways, it's almost all about people. Everything else will follow.
Thanks, Neville. I think you brought out an exceptional point that I was going to request that we pursue for a while. The UNSW and New South Wales, the Australian government, everyone talks about the importance of multiculturalism and how it's so important and critical to build multicultural societies. Multicultural societies are not just a matter of taking nationalities from 20 different countries and putting them together. What is inclusiveness? What is this kind of blending, you know? Is there a melting pot? Is it a mosaic? I mean, I used to refer to it in something I wrote a long time ago. I used to call it the divine peacock, you know, the feathers of a peacock. All the colors that you see, they're all separate and they're distinct. Yet you can't separate one color from the other. What exactly is multiculturalism? Because today, human civilization is actually scared of the migrant, isn't it? We worry. They're not like us. Because we're so used to what the familiar is. You know, we can relate to the familiar. Whether it's language or religion, cuisine or costumes, cultural constructs that we have. How do we take this whole multiculturalism, the movement of migrants? Because one of the biggest things that's happening in this century, and indeed over the past few years, is that we've started making a distinction between the refugee and the migrant. And refugees, do they become migrants? How do the entire society in Europe is today facing a calamitous situation. So in a moment of crisis, when migration, whether through the push factor or the pull factor, how do you deal with others? Not like me, you know? I mean, when Neville was talking about his wife Gladys, I have this old photograph of my aunt. My uncle had come here on a Colombo plan. And my aunt, there's a photograph in the newspapers. They were in Newcastle, this photograph with everybody, the who's who, because it's the first time they saw a lady in a sari. And the news report over there, little clipping that is there, and she cut it very poorly. The first question that she was asked was, do you speak English? And she did. She was brought up for many years in London. But I think that period has gone. There is a great deal of acceptance. Have we once again, or are we likely to once again, go back into a situation of non-acceptance for domestic reasons, whether unemployment goes up, whether there are pressures where migrants will take the jobs? How do we deal with multiculturalism? And I say this especially because I'm proud to be part of UNSW. Because one of the things UNSW talks about is the various nationalities that they have here as students and how they all get together. And I truly believe that there is a championing of this different ways of thinking and therefore shifting the way we think. And I'd like to throw this question first to Rowana, mainly to ask her, how do you see the future of migrants?
I see the future of migrants from India specifically as, you know, I think as I was saying earlier, we need to remember that people like us have been here a long time. And we need to remember that we are the beneficiaries of what's happened to indigenous people in this country, and understand that relationship that we as immigrants have with indigenous people here, and then move on to connect with each other, as everyone on this panel has said, you know, on an individual level, people to people, person to person. But I think UNSW is very well positioned to do that because of the immense depth of expertise that exists here. So you have an academic, of course we have Monica and we have Vinayak. We also have Karma McLean, who's done a lot of work on the historical links between India and Australia. We have people like Hari, Professor Ramaswamy Harindranath, who's done a lot of work on the media in India and Australia, and so many other academics in this university. And I think remembering that there are all these connections, there's this history, and then drilling down to that individual experience that you have with another person. So what Monica was saying, that idea of kind of fostering friendships, you know, almost artificially doing that, but to a purpose of building these broader, I guess, this network or assemblage of relationships. It starts with that individual friendship that you have with someone who's not like you. And I think that comes with a sense of humility and not trying to prove that, oh, Indians are better than everyone else because we had this ancient civilization, but remembering that, you know, Australians also have a very long ancient history, and being humble and being able to listen to other people who are different, whether it's Indians talking to Australians, remembering that they're different and therefore interesting, or whether it's Australians going to India and thinking that actually, as you said, all those misperceptions are not as bad as they're often made out to be. And being open to listening and being humble enough to understand that actually there are all these shared connections as well.
Thanks, Rana. I wanted to ask you a question, Varun, and I really wanted to ask you a seriously provocative and completely undiplomatic question. You know, we take great pride in saying that, you know, India is actually such a multicultural place. And you did mention about racism and stuff like that. I've always taken the position that Indians can be seriously racist. We talk about people from the southern part of India as Madrasis, don't we? Yeah. And believe me, the knowledge that we have about our own community, and by community I mean the larger Indian community, is also very limited. So this element of tolerance that we talk about when we meet other cultures outside India is not the tolerance that we display about our own people. So what justifies this expectation that we have, this noble expectation that we should be treated well by other people when we don't treat our own people well? Sorry, okay. Provocative.
Yeah, no, I completely understand, and I have thought about it a lot, and I think it's an unfair expectation we Indians have, given expecting the world to be not racist while we are still living with the caste system in India, which is so deeply entrenched. And if you read the stories which are actually happening and not media exaggerations, actually media is suppressing most of the caste-based horror stories because, again, media is mostly upper caste Hindus. So it doesn't serve them well to kind of, you know, talk about these stories which put them in bad light. But so yeah, I think it's partly, I would blame it on the human nature, which is greedy. Okay, give me everything. Don't expect anything from me. That is probably one of the reasons. Two, I feel Indians especially have been either manipulated by the politicians for a long, long time into this feeling that we did not deserve what we get, we did not get what we deserved. You know, over a period of, like, this whole narrative of we have been plundered for 2,000 years, and you know, so that feeling has given us some kind of inferiority complex, which has the other side of that is that aggression which comes with it, that okay, because somebody has taken something from me 700 years ago, I will grab this thing right now, whatever it is. And you know, so it's a very complicated thing to kind of sum up in this you know, the big panel, but this is kind of the crux of it. So I feel the only way out is more, even if not many, you know, Australians or you know, other country people from other countries coming to India, but at least Indians going out. As you know, Neville was saying, if one Indian student comes, there are at least 4 more people who come to Australia and they see a new culture. They probably will learn empathy, or at least, okay, this is the larger world. The perspective will probably open up, I hope.
No, thank you, Varun. I just wanted to draw in Monica once more and take her back to what she was talking about with regard to bilateral relations. Could it mean, therefore, that you can enhance the relationship between people of both countries when you are open to doing so? Whereas if you are prejudice-driven and you tell yourself that, look, I don't know, you mentioned inferiority complex. I mean, I think today everyone talks about India being the fastest growing economy and this and that. I mean, there's some kind of superiority complex. Whatever the complex is, at the end of the day, I think what we are looking for is a better life for our children. I think what we are looking for is transforming our current space. What we are looking for is actually creating a system where you're doing the right thing. And wanted to draw Monica into that if we are really looking at this space of bilateral relations, what is it that we need to do in order to improve understanding? And before you just wanted to throw a difficult thing I used to do with many students when I used to interact with them. And they all said how close they were to India-Australia relations, and I would ask a simple question to the Indian students: can you name 5 Australian writers? Most of them couldn't. If I would ask the Australian, can you name 5 Indian writers who have not been discovered by the Americans? They couldn't. So is it this lack of knowledge that we have about each other? Where does it come from? How do you change it?
Absolutely, I think prejudices hold people back. And if we want to be guided by our prejudices, then it becomes increasingly difficult to actually establish any kind of meaningful relationship with the other. But we're all flawed and we all have prejudices. I think the key is to actually acknowledge that there are prejudices that exist, to actually identify how we might be held back by our own biases against the people we interact with, or whoever it is on the other side, and actually saying, yes, I have a preconceived notion of seeing this other person or other community in a particular light, and acknowledging that that is a problem, and then working to actually shift that perception. Just a minor point on the discussion about racism, I think we should absolutely have expectations of not being subjected to racism anywhere we go, whether it's in our own country or outside. I think the key there again is to actually acknowledge that we may have those, racist tendencies or biases, and actually the first step is to acknowledge them and realize that something there is a problem, and then working to change it. And how you change it is you actually have individual conversations with people. India did this, Australia did that, means nothing. But when we connect with people and listen to each other's individual stories and connect with one another on a human level, I think that makes all the difference. So that's, I think, that's always going to have to be a critical part of any kind of effort. I don't know if I can name 5 Australian authors. I could probably name 5 policy analysts or people in my field who are Australian and who write about things I care about. But I'll share one anecdote. I moved here from the UK, where I lived for a decade before I moved here. And for many, many months, probably for up to a year afterwards, the first newspaper I would read in the morning was the Guardian UK edition and the BBC, as opposed to the Sydney Morning Herald or any other Australian paper. And it took me a long time to actually stop reading the British press and actually say, well, I live here now, so I need to actually better understand the politics and the issues of the day here. And I think that is a conscious act. It doesn't come automatically. We like what we're familiar with. We like what is comfortable and known, and it takes an effort to actually step out of our comfort zones and make that effort to get to know what is not known as well.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific point. You need to make the effort also to be part of the conversation. And I wanted to draw in Vinayak, and I'd like to draw in Laurie after that, but I wanted to draw in Vinayak Because if we're looking at the space of education, 'cause at the end of the day, what I think I'm past, history right now, it's the young. Education plays such a significant role. How do we use higher education? How do we use what UNSW does, for instance, through the India strategy, through the DIA initiative, in being able to address the kind of developmental challenges that countries face, in this case, India faces? Does higher education have a role? And what could that role be? Could higher education actually transform the way people think about each other? Can higher education become an instrument of foreign policy? So, your thoughts?
Thanks, Amit. I'm in a very unique position because I got a chance to listen, and it was such a deep conversation that I would like to add a few other thoughts around that as well. So interestingly, have any of you taken the 23andMe or like the DNA test? So I did one of those, and I found that I have some of my genetics is actually very Australian, and is Aboriginal. So that, I mean, for me was a very interesting insight without realizing it. And it comes back to the questions which kind of has been brought up many times, perceptions, the concepts of perceptions, misperceptions. And I'm actually a behavioral economist. I study behavior in transport, and perceptions play a huge role. And the way, I think it's really important to kind of first frame what perceptions mean. For me, perceptions is basically the likelihoods we associate to hypotheses about our world. So those hypotheses could be bad, and those hypotheses could be good in terms of how they affect me as an individual. And we make choices repeatedly around that, either to test those hypotheses. If it's bad, we might not be as likely to test those hypotheses as compared to the good. And that's where the curiosity aspect comes in. Being curious about anything, about a culture, about an individual, helps kind of question those perceptions. It allows you to test them out. And again, there's a very, very beautiful book by Professor Amartya Sen on tolerance. In that book, he kind of breaks it apart very, very beautifully, where he talks about the idea that tolerance and identity are absolutely interlinked. And if you think a little bit more deeply about what identity means, it's about your perception of yourself and your relationship to your perception of the world. And whenever we connect with people or talk to people and we are testing those hypotheses out, the likelihoods of the goods, the likelihoods of the bad, we are changing our identity. And to the point that we can actually identify each other as being similar. And that's when those conflicts kind of break down. So I think thinking about, at least for me, it makes it really easy to think about, because misperceptions are when I think about misperceptions, when I used to think about misperceptions, it was a really hard problem to solve. But when I think about perceptions and misperceptions this way, it makes it an easier problem to kind of relate it to identity and relate it to hypothesis testing. As a researcher, I mean, hypothesis testing is as an important aspect of it. It makes it easier. So getting people curious about their thoughts or about their ideologies or about as a hypothesis which they can test, and enabling that. And that's what education does. Education helps enable people to build hypotheses, enable people to test out hypotheses. Why do I go and do research? First of all, why did I move to Australia? It was, I had a hypothesis of a better life, a hypothesis of of better opportunities to continue my research, and that's what those hypotheses are being fulfilled in and are testing very positive. And I go back and work in India with those hypotheses and understanding those contexts. And even now, I do test hypotheses there, like how not only from a research transporty perspective, but how do systems work, so that you can make it easier. With some of the ways we kind of work through is not exactly the same. So how do you bridge the way we probably do our financing, or the way the financing is done there? The bureaucracies are different, the rules are a little different. So how do we kind of build that? So the only way you can do it is try it out, and be willing to fail, because failure, you learn, and you move on. And education helps you kind of think through that, if that helps.
Now that helps, and I'll pursue this trend, because I think now I'm trying to sort of ask myself whether Australia-India relations, it has a future. Would the role of education help determine that future? Would the role of education help us think different? And there, I just thought I'll draw Laurie in to ask her, the kind of society that we live in, which if you say multicultural, means people from all kinds of places. God knows I grew up in the city of Calcutta and did my schooling there, 11 years, did my undergrad studies there, same school, went to the same St. Xavier's College, then left. And it is a great city, it still is, with people from various different parts of India. But this is a different world, an extraordinarily different world. Now, do you think that the experience that you had in Mumbai, does it help you look at the future, look at the kind of workplace that you might go to, make you more accepting? What is the kind of impact that you had, apart from just shifting your perception? What impact has it had in your thinking, in the way you approach people now?
Well, I think it's had a very significant impact in the way I've approached my thinking and the way I approach people as well. I'll point out one of the things that I got to experience in Mumbai when I was working with UNSW India. So me and my team were looking into strategies to connect with international students, so students from India looking to study in Australia. And one of the things we got to do was actually interview a broad spectrum of students, high school students, master's students, and people just looking to study abroad. And I guess one of the things that really struck me was how each one of these students was so hardworking and very intelligent in their own way, but they were expressing their interest in studying here and kind of looking towards having the support network here and all that kind of thing. But when I was speaking with them, I really got to see a different perspective on how they saw their own country and how they saw education. They were so optimistic in the future of their country, and they wanted to give back so much to their nation through education. And they wanted to come to Australia and study to bring what they learnt here back there to make life better for themselves and the people around them. And I think that was a really interesting thought. Also, I can say that almost everyone that I met when I was in Mumbai, they had a very different impact on me. Almost everyone I met kind of made me think, you know, we should give more opportunities to ourselves to connect with the people around us. Because I find that when I travel especially, you kind of open your mind up more to speaking with people and getting to know the place. But we don't do that here. Like, I sit on the bus for an hour a day and I don't speak to the people around me. What do they have to say? What input do they have to how we live our lives? But when I was traveling in Mumbai, I think it really gave me the opportunity to, especially in a different part of the world, get a different perspective on how other people see their way of life and how other people live, and the kind of input they have in the way they see the world and how that impacts how I see the world. So I came back to Australia, I guess, with a more open mindset and immediately after my trip, every time I spoke to someone, it was with that in mind and really wanting to get to their core of why they think the way they think, what background made them think that way, and what are their motivations and aspirations, and what makes them a person. So I think that experience really incited that in me.
Neville, I just wanted to ask you, given the huge experience that you've had in business and industry, your relationship with higher education, your interactions and with multiculturalism, and wanted to also draw Monica in on this and ask one basic question. What is the role of education in transforming India-Australia relations? Neville, and then Monica.
Well, I think the biggest role that education has is that it is all about people. And it's all about bringing people together. And that should be happening on a daily basis on this campus, and it is happening informally. But I'm always been a believer that being proactive makes a difference. You've got to believe that if an institution decides it's going to do something, it can make it better. You can leave it to the market as people, with free markets, and let people find their own level and it'll all happen. But if you set out to say, we've got to help our students to get the value of being together on this campus and studying together. And the amount of interaction that we have of students from different parts of the world that come here, I think is relatively limited. And it's largely at a personal level. I think there should be more active programs to make it happen. For example, you can give the one that you and I have had and Mala have had so much to do with, and that is we have the Gandhi statue on this campus. We celebrate Gandhi's birthday, and we celebrate or remember the day he was assassinated. And after that, we have the Gandhi oration, which has become an institution. What I've observed for years now is that the people who attend the ceremonies at the Gandhi bust are almost entirely of Indian origin. Yet Gandhi's message is for the whole world. Nobody would ever question that it is. What is it that causes us not to have non-Indians at those? What is it? And I say, I place the bulk of the responsibility not on the non-Indians, but on the Indians. 100, 150 people came on October the 2nd. There were 3 non-Indians. And every year I say, every one of you, next year you must bring at least one person who's not an Indian and introduce them to one thing that's very special about India. It doesn't happen. And I don't think the university here does anything about making that happen. So that whole thing of being proactive, treat human beings as assets, celebrate diversity, take advantage of value that people bring here as assets, as capital, people who go back to India, the alumni. Australia does not have, it has a massive diaspora in relative terms, but not in the same scale that India has. But we have all the students who've gone back to India, to China. Those we should treat as honorary Australians and keep in touch with them, not on a sporadic basis, but actually with events, with special, and making them appreciate that we value them, we miss them, and we would like them to continue to have an affection and love and care for this country.
Monica, just getting back to the question, can education be the tipping point in a stronger, resilient India-Australia relationship? Not just at a government-to-government level. If it's at the government-to-government level, could it be a pillar in Australia and India's foreign policy? If it's at a people-to-people level, could it shift thinking?
Absolutely. I think education is already a very significant pillar in the bilateral relationship. I think there's different levels at which education sort of facilitates a more robust, deeper, stronger relationship. One is obviously students, the student traffic both ways, Indian students coming and studying here and having that opportunity to broaden their horizons and at the same time Australian students going to India and actually doing the same, recognizing that both sides have something to teach the other. Quite often we fall into that colonial mindset where we think that only Australia, with its technological expertise and its developed sort of context, has something to offer. That is not the case. There are plenty of things that Indian institutions are doing that can be, that are transferable, and that knowledge can be brought to this side of the world, this part of the world, and can benefit communities here. At the same time, if you think about education with a lowercase e, just educating ourselves about, each other in informal ways, whether it's because of the presence of student communities here or other exchanges that take place at a people-to-people level. That kind of education is also critical to enhancing the relationship and giving it depth. We often talk about strategic depth in foreign and security policy, but even at a people-to-people level, having people come here and exchange ideas about arts, culture, it has to then go beyond. It has to happen in a sustainable manner. And I think that's something the Australia-India Youth Dialogue has done really well. The significance attached to the fact that every year there's a group of 30 young emerging leaders, 15 from Australia and 15 from India. Once they come together and then go their separate ways, there is a very significant effort on part of the committee to actually keep them connected and to engage them whenever there's some alumni visiting India or Indian alumni visiting Australia, to actually bring in government involvement and have like policy talks, or most recently the Victorian the governor of Victoria was in Delhi, and the AIYD organized an alumni catch-up with the governor. And so just creating those opportunities that keep the momentum going and keep that interest alive is also really important.
Before I
Can I?
throw the panel for discussions with the floor, I am tempted to raise a question for Roanna and for Varun, and then of course Vinayak has an interjection, we get to that. But when Monica talked about strategic depth, something that we talk about in foreign and security policy, there's another thing we talk about. We talk about strategic clarity. And in strategic clarity, it's where countries actually take a decision because they're clear that this is the country I want to engage with, or this is the country I don't want to disengage with, but I don't need to be that desperately close to. What, in your view, is the role, Varun, Roanna, of soft power? What kind of role can soft power play in shifting perceptions?
Okay, I'll go first. So one example I remember, sorry, cricket is a tired cliche, but still the example is slightly related to cricket. It was, I think, in the 90s, mid-90s, India and Australia were like really big rivals in cricket, though we were probably losing 4 out of 10 matches and they were winning 6. Australia was winning 6, but the rivalry was really strong, and we would, as fans of cricket, we would look forward to the matches. And because of this strong rivalry, there was a lot of bitterness about Australia. I'm talking about people of my generation who were cricket followers. We were really, we thought of Australian cricketers as bullies, and by extension, probably Australian people, because of the sledging on the field, because we were losing some really closely fought matches. And there was this image that, okay, these people are really aggressive, and we are these soft and cuddly, cute people, and we are losing the matches. And then something happened. After, I don't remember, 96 probably or 98, I don't remember the year exactly, but Steve Waugh, the Australian captain, adopted an NGO in India, in Sundarbans, and he started, meeting the kids regularly. They were underprivileged kids. He would visit them regularly. He gave lots of money, and that immediately that changed the perception of Australia in many Indians' minds. You know, for us, suddenly they were not aggressive, suddenly they were not bullies, suddenly, you know, they were okay, they were humans like us, they cared for other humans, that's all. So that is something which I remember from many years ago. Recently, I met Professor Ian Woolford in Melbourne. He's a professor of Hindi in Australia. He's an American and I think half American, half British, living in Australia, teaching Hindi. He is working on a very famous Hindi writer, Phanishwar Nath Renu. That's his PhD subject, I think, and he's writing a book on Phanishwar Nath Renu. And again, so he's very active on Twitter and social media. Seeing Ian Woolford talking about Indian writers, Indian poets, many Indians actually are discovering Hindi literature through Professor Ian Woolford's Twitter feed, because he has this calendar of, the birthdays of every Indian writer. So every day he would put a picture of today. Okay, today is the birthday of Uday Prakash, or today is the birthday of, say, Parsai. So any big Indian writer, and Indians are discovering. So it again is changing the perception of Australia and giving us new avenues to look at another country. We only had cricket, as I said, but there are many other ways. Another smaller example, last year, Melbourne Comedy Festival, people came to Bengaluru Comedy Fest, which is, again, the stand-up comedy is now really, really booming in India. And because it is booming, we are looking at the world out there, because lots of Indian comics do, speak in English, and we do comedy which is almost global, because of the kind of issues. Either it is observational comedy, or even if it is political, but it is about, Trump is like the context everybody understands. So Melbourne Comedy Festival now has a collaboration with Bengaluru Comedy Festival, and all these things are opening up many new avenues for people to people participation. And I think, again, Bollywood has been a long-term, idea of India for Australians, probably. But at the same time, now Australian cinema is traveling to India. I know this collective of Australian filmmakers, David Michaud and sorry, I forgot the second name, but there are three filmmakers from Australia who are making fantastic cinema, Animal Kingdom, and they are, so we look forward to Australian films when they travel to Mumbai Film Festival. So all of these, I think, are really exciting ways to look at another country. So,
Thanks, Varun. Rohana, would you like to pick up on that and tell me from your point of view, because you're based here, Varun's based in India. How do you see soft power?
Yeah, I think soft power has been responsible for some very hard changes. I came here from Mumbai. I'm from Bombay myself. And I came here as an international student. And in Bombay, while our public transport system is not luxurious, it's dependable, and it's a vast network of buses and trains, etc. So as a young woman, I used to travel alone a lot, even at night, and came to Australia, started working in market research, door-to-door market research. Going into these, suburbs that I'd never heard of. So this is within the first week of arriving. And I thought, just go, do your job, and then take the bus back home. So I got to where I had to go. It got dark. The lady I interviewed, we did the interview, etc. So I got the question of how come you speak such good English, etc. And then after we finished, she said, so how are you getting home? And I said, I'll just catch a bus. There's a bus stop here. She said, what bus? There's no bus. The buses don't exist after a certain time, like 5 p.m. on weekends. It was a weekend job I was doing. And then I really panicked, because I thought, oh my God, it's dark. It's like this suburb. It was one of those northwestern suburbs where the public transport system is really, really bad. You need to have a car, even today. And then I thought, how on earth am I going to get to my destination, which was like some 20 or 30 kilometers away? And without even thinking about it, she said, hang on, I'll drop you to the closest train station where you can get, bus or train, whatever. And I was so shocked because I'd been schooled and I'd been kind of socialized into thinking that, oh, all these white Westerners, they're very proper. They have this boundary between the public and the private, and not like Indians who are very helpful and they'll welcome you home, etc. So I was really extremely shocked, and my misperception of this very standoffish woman completely changed in an instant, and it changed the way I thought about Australia and about what it means to be an Australian. And so this woman, who had no reason at all to help me, actually drove me. She took the trouble to get into a car, drive me quite a distance away, so I would be safe. And that has always stuck with me. And so when Vinayak was talking about hypothesis testing, I think that's a great way to think about education even. So I came here to study, was being educated in the academy, but a lot of the education also happened on the streets. And the hypothesis that I was testing didn't happen consciously, but these personal interactions completely changed the way I think about this country. And also in my book, these connections that the characters have with each other happen, over laughter. They happen over shared experiences of class, etc. So it's really what everyone has been saying on this panel. It's those really intimate connections that change the way you think about another person and therefore another country, I think.
Vinayak, you wanted to say something, so the floor is yours, and then we open it for Q&A.
Thank you, Amit. I just want to echo what Rohan was saying about education. And I think in India, like me growing up, US, UK, the education system, and one of the things that it resonated and I was able to pick up and disentangle in my head was the idea that universities, family members as well as friends who had gone abroad and come back when I was growing up, the idea of academic freedom. And now I'm able to articulate it a little bit more, was that education institutions provide a safe place to actually have those discussions and actually talk about misperceptions and that academic freedom aspect of it helps break those misperceptions, and I think that's one of the key roles education can play. The second one is more operational, and I think we talk about connections, networks. A lot of my friends now who studied in the US go back for VC funding because they have that network there. Here, the Australian venture capitalist funding is also is quite booming, and there are our students who go back. They can come back and actually tap into these resources, and would make Australia grow. And it also gives us access to opportunities there. So I think that's what an education as a pillar, and I think that's how the relationship with UK and the US was built upon, was the students who studied in Harvard, studied in Cambridge and Oxford, and came back, created opportunities and built opportunities there. I just wanted to close that.
Thanks very much. And I've actually enjoyed what the panelists have all said. But I think it's important to probably take it to the next step, because I'm the one who asked questions, and if there are questions that any of you would like to ask, because it's time to provoke them a little bit more, because they're all energized and they're going to make these very important statements, and floor is open. Yes, ma'am. Would you like to introduce yourself when you ask a question?
Hi, my name is
Might
Sneha.
stand up.
Yeah, okay. My name is Sneha Ajit, and I'm a master's in law with media and journalism student. I saw the topic of discussion today. I was really excited because it said India-Australia relations, where does the future lie? So I want to know, I'm getting educated here, and for 3 years I was in UK before this in Manchester, and when I came here for my master's, the one thing that I saw a lot was there was a lot of Indian events happening in UNSW. So I just wanted to know, beyond education, when it comes to the next step, because we have in the panel like eminent personalities like Mr. Neville Roche, who is also the Indian Prime Minister's Global Advisory council member. So I just wanted to know, like, what beyond education, the next step? How do we get opportunities? First of all, as Indian students, after my master's, most of us go back to India, or like if we want to expand or like do something here, when will we reach a stage where Indians can get a visa on arrival to in Australia, or some kind of relations between India and Australia beyond education and cricket? Because here in Australia, it's like one of the I think it's the 20th most watched sport. So it's not as popular in Australia as it is in India. It doesn't help us here. So we just wanted to know, beyond education, in the next step, how can we build relations, or at what pace are we going? So.
That question is going to solve a huge number of things. It's a tough question, but I just thought, as I understand it, what you said your first name was? Sneha. I think what Sneha is asking is multiple questions, but if you were to break it up, I think one of the questions would be, what is the link between education and employability in Australia? That would be one segment as I see it. I don't know whether it's possible for any of us to give a quick and authentic and credible response as to when Australia is going to introduce visa on arrival for Indians. It's a government decision, but nevertheless, I think the education and employability question, I presume, employability in Australia, no one could be better than Neville with the experience that he's had, particularly with industry.
Tough one. One of the things I wanted to say when Amit said, does the Australia-India relations have a future? I think there's no question that it has a future. That's a statement of fact. It exists and it's going to continue. And the challenge we have is, what kind of a future is it? And what is the quality of that future going to be? What value is it going to add? That's where I think all of us have got to add value: institutions, governments, people like you and me. What is happening, though, in Australia is there is a thing happening as we speak and quite quietly in the background, and I discover it with surprise almost every day, is that I believe the Indian community in Australia has arrived. I think we are increasingly seeing more and more Indians in significant positions in business, in government, in academia in a big way. And that is changing both the way Australians see Indians and Indians see Australia. The sense that we are at any disadvantage, I think, is proved wrong every time we see how people of Indian origin are faring. I mean, stellar examples, but you know, Peter Varghese is one worth talking about. He is an Indian who wasn't born in India. He was born in Africa, went to the UK, and then his family came here. He has just retired as the head of Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Before that, he was Australia's High Commissioner in India. Before that, he was Australia's High Commissioner in Malaysia. Before that, he was the head of the Office of National Assessments, which is the scoop, the top of all the spooks around. That's what he has achieved, and he's accepted. He handles himself exceptionally well. He's comfortable. He's relaxed. And I think the challenge is for people who've done it and who've made well is also to start pointing out these success stories, looking to people as being role models. And, you know, people like yourself, because you're successful, you're going to do well here. You know, I think you can make a huge difference by connecting people, helping Indians who have come here for the first time and struggled, and everybody does. It's a challenge. And I think the Indian community can do a lot more. But also you can encourage Indians and non-Indians to bridge that gap and to spend a bit more time with each other. One of the risks we have right now is the numbers have now reached and passed critical mass. Suddenly now Indians can live in Australia for the rest of their lives and not spend much time in any non-Indian. And a lot of people are doing that. And that really worries me a lot. The other thing that all young people can do, of course, is to intermarry. I say that with certain, Australia has the highest rate of intermarriage in the world. Again, that's an image that no one would have of Australia. And I think about the way in which Australians have adjusted to that. I always think of my son's mother and father-in-law. They brought up on the North Shore, genteel living, tennis in the afternoon teas, and all of that, peaceful existence, idyllic. And suddenly their daughter marries an Indian, my son, and now 50, 60, 70 of us descend on them on Christmas Day. And they are outnumbered, and yet I look at them. They have adjusted to it as if it was no problem at all. They've enjoyed it, they've learned to enjoy Indian food, they enjoy the company. So in the end, I think a lot depends on, I think we never underestimate the power of one, the power of the individual. And I think we've got to keep encouraging that. And I think, the thing just that, finally, as a metaphor, by the way, the best metaphor for multiculturalism that I have is an orchestra. Because in an orchestra, every instrument is different, yet it has a role, and yet it can harmonize. And even better than an orchestra is a jazz orchestra, because they can improvise and become creative. And the value of diversity is that it breeds creativity. That's what we bring, that's what everybody else who comes here. And our challenge is to behave like multicultural Australians and not only as Indian Australians. I don't know if that helped, but.
Well, I mean, just wanted to
Not
ask you,
quite.
what's your passport? Are you Indian or Australian?
I'm Indian.
You're Indian. So what I think is that this is a great place in order to expand your education. And if you've done masters in the area that you're talking about, speak to Monica and she'll tell you to do a PhD. But I would also say, and that's a good decision. I would also say that if you were to work, whether it's India or Fiji or Australia, it all depends on what the market wants. At the end of the day, education is correlated with employability only if you're meeting the demand-supply. That is the crux of the whole thing. And you have a differentiator from the others depending on what you're learning, and therefore what value you're bringing onto the table. I don't know if that answers the question, but you get absolutely top-class education here. You can get top-class education in India as well. But this is a place where you can get quality education which adds value. So very strongly recommended. Sorry, yes, Warren.
My name is Warren Duncan. I have to say I was a little shocked to hear what Laurie said about the apprehension that she had before going to India. This is 2017. But that apprehension was reinforced by people around her. And I'm thinking, is that Australia's fault? Is that India's fault? I was in India recently and I read in the newspaper a report about where India is standing in terms of international tourism. It's number 51 in the world. How can that be? India is the total tourist package. So they're selling the wrong image, obviously. Incredible India obviously is not cutting the mustard. What we know is that India is a place, as several people have mentioned, where you meet people, where you can integrate with people. You can assume that they will understand some English and you'll always get a response, whoever that person is. So I'd like to ask whoever wants to answer on the panel, what can India do to change that perception, which is obviously real? And Laurie's not making it up, it's what she feels and what other people around her said. And what can Australia do to maybe try to counteract that?
Maybe you should make Laurie the brand ambassador. That's my word. Anyone wants to respond to Warren's question?
Well, just change the government in India. That'll make a huge difference. But since that can't be done very easily, maybe the Indian on the panel should speak.
Just to interrupt before I pass it on to Warren, pass it on to Varun. What I think the question really was, are we actually marketing the right product to the client? Are we just marketing a product? Because clients are always, the customer is very savvy. If you have a bad soap and a fantastic packaging, they'll buy it once. But then they know exactly that the soap is bad. are you marketing the wrong product in the wrong way? I mean, after all, you are marketing the Taj Mahal, which is a great product. Are we marketing it the wrong way? I think that is the question.
Actually,
How do we improve?
The article raised that question.
Yeah. How do we improve?
It also detailed the enormous amount of money that is being spent on marketing, but it's obviously not working.
Yeah, so I feel one, India is embroiled in too many issues right now. It has always been probably in the last 60, 70 years since independence. But the thing about it, it was shocking for many Indians too to read that we are, so low on the tourism visits from all around the world because we have Taj Mahal. We have so many cultures within our country. We have so many every state is different, and still, it's partly I think again I'm not an expert, but I think partly it is due to the bureaucracy of. So we are creating great campaigns, but those campaigns are only for YouTube, and they're not reaching the right people. Two, the campaigns are only existing in a vacuum because the campaign is promising you an India, but that India exists only in that airbrushed campaign. You go to Taj Mahal and you figure out how difficult it is even to reach Taj Mahal, even for an Indian. Because it's you enter the city of Agra, and while going to Taj Mahal, as if to make Taj Mahal look even more beautiful, they have, the roads are dug up. There are piles of garbage at many places, and so you kind of it's like if you can't set Taj Mahal right, if you can't set Varanasi or Banaras right, which are like the biggest tourist hubs, if you can't do that, then just don't promise that much, because ultimately, even if five people come, they go back with negative review. 25 who were supposed to come will not come.
Yeah.
So it's a mixture of many things. Government level, yes, but people level more so, because I think we, as we say so I studied in Banaras, Varanasi, in the university there. As people in Varanasi say, we are happy on our own. We don't care, which is kind of the mindset which has to be transcended by the government as well as the people, which is not happening.
Add something to that. Sure. I've been to India 25, 26 times, I think. And on every occasion, when I've come back and people have asked me about the trip, I always say the same thing. What you remember when you come back from India is the people you met.
Yeah.
You remember those little vignettes, those chance meetings. You remember those characters. The lady sitting in front of the temple selling flowers, so happy. She knows things that we don't know about happiness. That's what India has to offer, but obviously the bureaucrats and the admin in Delhi don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree. And I think we need to also understand who our customers are. So if I mean, the first rule of trying to market something is, who are we marketing it to? So when Indonesia goes and markets Bali, it's marketing it to the young folk. And if Europe is marketing a certain cruise, it's marketing a certain segment. And the best experience, when I've kind of gone out and tried to sell the tourism in India, it's been the Palace on Wheels. And I mean, that is the way you can kind of get around but that doesn't come out in any of. So what you see is Taj Mahal, you see Banaras, but it doesn't show you the nice way you can actually go through it in a very, very comfortable way, having a rich experience, mingling with people. I mean,
But just to draw it back, because I think we've just wonderfully digressed. I think that if we're looking at the future of India-Australia relations, and I was going to try and do a huge stretch in terms of what has just been said, perhaps you're marketing India-Australia relations the wrong way, which is why the buy-in has been limited. But I totally agree with what Neville said. Is there a future? Most certainly there is, but what kind of future? What are we looking at? Who are we targeting? We just have time for one last question. Yes, sir. Oh my God, many hands. So, in all fairness, you, sir, start with. No, I think they're recording.
Hi, my name's Nigel Redding. I'm an architect, a TEDx speaker, quite interested in sustainable design and development. So, in a sense, I've also done stand-up comedy via TEDx. My perception of this conversation is very rewarding because I'm from Hong Kong, but also grew up in Perth in Western Australia. My father is English, and my mother's father was Indian, and her mother was Chinese. And in the 1930s, that was quite a progressive relationship. So a lot of boxes have been ticked for me on a personal level tonight. My question relates to, as you might imagine, to sustainable design and development in terms of this semi-rhetorical question of where does the future lie between Australia and India. And what I'd like to ask is, I've spent the last 10 years in China practicing as an architect and urban designer, and we're looking at, say, half an order of magnitude in terms of GDP per capita income for both China and certainly India to come up to the sort of levels of the Australian average income, which I think is something like 50,000 US per capita per annum. And of course, China has begun maybe 20, 30 years ahead of India an urbanization program as well, and the development of a large middle class. So I'm wondering, perhaps semi-rhetorically, whether India and Australia's relationship could hinge on facilitating the sustainable development of both countries, of information being shared through the education systems and interchanges, through the mutual enlightenment or an illumination. I'm wondering whether that might be one potential theme that could be led both from a bottom-up but also a top-down governmental level.
With permission of the panel, if there's anyone who'd like to respond, otherwise I could respond to this. I do know, I think that's a wonderful question, sir, and thank you very much for it. I do know that this is an area that has now been picked up as a critical area of possible convergence and learning from both sides. UNSW has been a champion in this, and I'm hoping we'd see good news in a short while. But it really is sitting down and crafting collaborative arrangements between schools of architecture and built environment from both sides, looking at the whole concept of smart cities, looking at how products are environmentally friendly, how they are sustainable. Has the conversation opened? Yes. Am I hopeful that the conversation will be positive? Yes. But at the end of the day, it needs to be commercialized, and you need to be able to visibly see impact on the ground. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, you've begun to. What preoccupies me is that if both China and India, for example, with their populations, develop similar levels of standards of living to the developed world, we're going to need several more planets worth of resources at current consumption levels and current levels of inefficiency in our economies. So apparently is quite a lot of progress that needs to be made.
Well, you mentioned a figure of $50,000. I would hazard a guess that I doubt very much that the Indian population would have a per capita income of $50,000. But we're over 1.3 billion people. Yeah, what I meant was even if we were to catch up, no matter how rapidly the Indian economy goes, we are already 1.3 billion people. Australia is 24, 25 million people. And so it's going to be a challenge, but I do anticipate that the quality of life in India would improve. What I think is a bigger challenge is not the improvement of the quality of life, but making life far more inclusive in terms of the spread. Vinayak, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Amit. So I think there's absolutely a future in that direction, and strong steps have been taken. And Sarbesh was sitting right next to you. He's been one of the leaders in that, setting up, leading the smart cities workshops, which he's been doing there. We have, so the opportunity lies, the way we want to be thinking about the opportunity for sustainable is the idea of leapfrogging. So currently the way all the developed countries are going is in a more linear way around integrating sustainability into their current systems, just because the capital costs of incorporating them is, it doesn't stack up. The cost-benefit analysis don't stack up. But there are opportunities, huge opportunities, especially in, I mean, I can talk about the work, I'll just take the opportunity to talk about the work in transport, where we're kind of going and thinking of not using physical infrastructure, but digital infrastructure to manage transport. Yeah, so there are opportunities to just leapfrog from this linear thing. And UNSW has been doing a lot of work and providing that, I think, a key direction in that future. If that.
Thanks, Vinayak. And you had a question.
My question is for Neville. My name is Kinjal, and I'm studying Masters in Business Law here in UNSW. And my question is to you, sir, that I wanted to know that how do Indian companies see graduates from UNSW? Like personally, I have very strong feeling to go back to India and work for India, and in the areas where I have recently studied many things on the blockchain technology and the fintech and regtech. But I really wanted to know that how do Indian companies, specifically like TCS or Infosys or any big companies, how do they see Indian graduates who are coming out from Australia, and how willing they are to accept graduates from UNSW over the graduates of over the Indian graduates, and what are our good prospects when we go back to the country like that? That's my question.
Well, I think Amit will probably be a better person to answer that question, but I'll give you an honest answer.
Yeah.
I still think that the preferred destinations of choice out of India are the US and the UK.
Yes.
And there's a history there and the success rates are there. Australia has started a lot later, but gradually we are getting large numbers of people who go back and are beginning to do very well. I think there's a marketing job to be done. And one of the things you find, just as Indians, that Australians are ignorant about India and see things in a very warped sort of way, not deliberately, but just when you go to India, it's amazing how little India knows and appreciates about what Australia has to offer. For example, they don't know that we've had 14 Nobel Prizes, of which all but one is in science and medicine. That's something that people get quite surprised by when you tell them that. The innovation upon innovation that has happened in Australia over the centuries, and that continues to happen, and things that are very relevant today, like the invention of Wi-Fi. But that's only one example. There are any number of examples. The leadership we have at this university in quantum computing. So I think there's a job to be done there, and I think universities and the Australian government also need to play a big role. And so having someone like Amit in India promoting UNSW and making people aware of it is going to make a big difference. But it is challenging. When I was on the Prime Minister's Council, of course, the Americans were all telling us how great they were and they were doing so well. So I used to make it a point to at least say, I only talked about Australia. I didn't pretend that I could solve India's problems. And it was, you did, after some time, the people who attended that regularly, began to have, you can influence them. And I think the Indian students here, in their own interests, but also in the interests of the country they come from, and have to keep talking Australia up, because there's a lot to talk about. We are good at a lot of things, and there are some aspects of Australia which are superior, I think, in many ways, because Australia, because of its small population, Australians have always had to be generalists. And Australians are in great demand overseas. We have Australians doing incredibly well. This is of all origins, not just. So that reality, I think, is not yet fully appreciated. But I think it'll happen, and I mean, but if, as an Australian, I would love you to stay in Australia. But
Yes, because I personally have a deep attachment with India, and I really want to go back and do something in India which is developing. So I don't want to, like many other friends are mine who are actually studying in US and Canada, they have settled there not by choice because they are not getting the equal pay rates and the equal level of opportunities compared to India. So that's like the choice that they have to consider. It's not a choice. It's like in India we do not get that good pay and not that kind of a recognition from the Indian companies. They prefer students from IITs and IIMs over like these.
But I think you should connect with Indian companies here. For example, the
Yes.
IT industry now has just about everyone who's anyone in IT, and they're beginning now. TCS, for example, is beginning to recruit steadily and seriously in numbers. And then you have a choice. You know, you can go back and work with them anywhere in the world. So that's one thing that you could consider.
Sure.
The other thing, actually, I would like to add to Neville just two other points. Like, I think one of the best kept secrets is that SBI General is actually supported by IAG, the Insurance Australia Group. So they have a large stake in SBI's this thing. So in the fintech industry, there is an Australian company who's actually backing an insurer, SBI General there. So pretty much all the traffic signals in India are based on actually Sydney technology. It's called SCATS. Bitcoin, since you're talking about blockchain, I mean, the whole the technologies that are being developed by BitPOS and all here in the Sydney area, they have shop in India who are supporting it, but also supporting it across the world. So there's definitely, I think you wanting to go back and being here at UNSW is probably the best place because it's getting you into a better place back in India.
Back in India. Thank you.
But before I pass the mic on to you, I just wanted to say that I have a completely contra view. For me, TCS, just a name, Infosys, and all these names. These are not Indian companies. For me, they are international companies. They are global companies. And global companies will make global recruitments if you're good enough. I think that is the critical thing. You may have an identity as an Indian, but your professional identity has to be global. Because if you expect, Tata Motors owns Jaguar. It's not a British car. It's not an Indian car. I think that is the difference you make. Because at the end of the day, if companies have to succeed and grow and get respected, they will only pick up the best. What you have as an opportunity in UNSW is to be among the best. And that is your real USP. And that's what you need to sell. Ma'am, your question. So, just a moment. We need a mic. Could we make this the last question? Because I know that there's... Okay. Sorry, democratically.
Mine's not a question, mine's a statement.
Yours is a statement. So, it doesn't count as a question.
Oh, okay. Look, hello, my name's Felicity Simmons, and I've been here I've been sitting down too long. I've been here 6 years longer than you. There you go. So, may I talk to that lady there who just spoke?
Absolutely. Talk to the whole
When you said that you get more money here than you do in India, I'd like to tell you that I've had experience working in other countries, America, China, and all that. And it occurs to me that I might like to share with you, it doesn't matter how much money you get in this country or that country, it's the lifestyle you live in that country. So even though you get less money in India, you have a certain lifestyle, which is probably equivalent or better than what you get here, even though you're getting more money here. And the same, when I went to America, I was getting more money, but everything was costing more in American terms. So I basically was thinking, well, forget about all the conversion rates, just live here within the system and enjoy. Okay? but let me read. So what I'd like to say about how do we get people, I kept thinking to myself, how, when you were talking, Monica. But basically what occurred to me, I've lived in this country a long time, and I've grown up, I've been and traveled around, but I always come back here, so I'm an Aussie. And so the thing is, one way of getting talk at a basic level, you've got to get people finding out about India at a basic level. So how do you do it? So may I suggest that, for instance, I go to libraries a lot, and I love education. I was educated in India, and I was asked if I speak English. I was absolutely horrified. How can they say such a stupid thing on the boat? And when I came here, and when I went to university 20 years later, and they just accepted my Indian education, I was absolutely amazed how amazing that they did. But the thing is, say, in the libraries, we have all these writers like Rosanna. Yes, Rosanna, you know, if they come over and talk to the outskirts, like I live in Cronulla, and there's a lot of Anglos there. I mean, they all go to the library talks and this and that, and you've got all these wonderful authors, Indian authors, and they write about India. So if they go there and talk to people, and people see that, hear a bit more about them. And I think that I've seen on the website, they have chats or something in Melbourne, don't they? They have sort of talks at the university level where people can go, anybody can go. I told some of my locals today I was coming here, and they wanted to know all about it. And I said, well, you know, they're having this, it's India Week. And so they were all very interested, but they didn't know about it. And so none of them are here. And they could have factored it into their life if they knew. So somehow there needs to be more talking at local level. How to do that? Well, that's something we need to do.
Thank you so much. Sir?
Hard to top that. It's really good. So I guess this is the last question, and thank you for the opportunity. My name's Raj. I used to be Anuraj, then I went to Raj, and then I'm now Raj professionally. That's a different conversation. I'm going to draw you, because the education is the theme, and this is, again, I'm no expert, but this is because I work in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community through AFL and the arts. Do I see a lack of education in the Indian community towards the traditional owners of the land? Because no one touched upon that in this conversation, and I was thinking, was there something that we could do better? And I'm going to throw this question out to any international student here, specifically Sneha and Kinjal. What is your understanding about the traditional owners of the land that, you know, on we gathered today?
So I think correct that Rana did mention.
Yeah, I did mention it very briefly, but you're right. We don't have. So when I came here as an international student, zero clue about, you know, Indigenous Australians and the dispossession, etc. It's like, you know, I always think that in India we could kick the British out because we had janta, we had population. Here they were much smaller and it was much harder. But I completely agree, absolutely right. Until we understand that relationship that we as immigrants have as beneficiaries of Indigenous dispossession, we're just kind of living on the surface in many ways. So that's why I think it's very important to understand the history that we as international students are coming into, immigrants from India come into here, and I think that's extremely crucial. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, we don't do enough.
Can I just suggest one thing to you, because you're doing work in that area? I've stopped using the word traditional owners of the land. I use the words original owners of the land. Whereas it's being watered down, it's traditional custodians of the land. In other words, these people never owned the place.
Yeah.
But they did. And as Indians and as people who have come from outside the country, we should be showing that respect. One of the things I did achieve as a result of my advice to the Consul General here at the time, Amit's successor, we were able to get Narendra Modi to do an acknowledgement of country at his event in Sydney, in Parliament House, possibly the first foreign head of state to do it, and at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. He did it. So I think that part the Indian community and foreigners people who have migrated here generally, we need to take ownership of that. And in multiculturalism, we wanted it to be inclusive, and inclusiveness start with the indigenous people. Then it moves on to the host community, and the fact that they made it and allowed it to all happen with good grace and good humor. And then it's us migrants. But the indigenous people should come first.
I think on that note, just a moment. You would like to get a mic across because it's being recorded?
It's being recorded.
Sorry, sir.
Migrant to this country for the last 34 years and spent 30 years trying to promote the Hindi language. This is our 30th anniversary, and I wanted to support what Neville said as well as what you said. Through our language schools, we teach a lot about the Aboriginal culture. We also include the national anthem of Australia as well as India, and in the national anthem, we have one verse which is in Dharuk. And the Sanskrit school has even gone further, and they've actually translated the whole anthem in Sanskrit. So things like that are happening, but this is at the primary school level. We now have 8 schools teaching Hindi, and through language, actually there's been a great connection, and the Australian government has taken us seriously. We have a national curriculum, K to 10, for Hindi in the Australian national curriculum, of which I was one of the writers. And this has been there since 2015. And recently, Simon Birmingham has acknowledged that Hindi should be part of the Ella program, which is a new program which they brought out to teach languages to primary school, preschool students. So it is starting to happen. Most of the states, language is mandatory in primary school. But in New South Wales, unfortunately, it's not yet mandatory. So there are efforts being made, and these are actually efforts that are long-lasting. They have taken our community seriously. We have politicians who are speaking in Hindi, as well as doing the Bollywood dancing.
And we also have Southern Crossings, which is an online space, an online publication that a group of us from Indian Australians and one Sri Lankan Australian, it's an intervention in the media where we as writers contribute to the debate about whatever's going on from a South Asian perspective. And we write about indigenous, the relationship between indigenous and immigrant communities as well. So, but we don't do enough of it. Yeah.
So on that note, I'd like to request all of you to give a big hand to this outstanding panelist here.
Thank you, Amit, for amazing moderation.
I also wanted to say that what Felicity said, and Raj, what you raised, I think it tied up the entire debate, which Laurie actually started off when she started speaking. It's how openness, at the end of the day, wins the day. May I invite Marilyn to come across over here, because I find there are some gifts from UNSW for each of the panelists. Marilyn, would you please do the honors? So I'll call them out by name. Let me just say thank you to Laurie, the youngest panelist over here. Thank you, Varun, for being here. I know that you just come in from Melbourne, but have a great time. Thanks to Roanna. It's a great book. Fantastic to have you here. Thanks to Monica, who's going to transform India-Australia relations right now. Careful. Thanks to Vinayak. Thank you, Neville, as always. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand there's wine and other things around, which I've delayed everyone. I can only say you've been a fantastic audience. It's been a brilliant discussion, much longer than we had actually anticipated, and I was making sure I was not looking at the back of the hall because I'm sure they was going and pointing to their clock. But thank you very much. It's been a great honor, great pleasure. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Come, let's go.
India Illuminated has been a week of really amazing panels here at UNSW that not only showcase the research expertise and strength that exists here at UNSW in relation to India, but also it's actually been a great series of discussions around how we can take the relationship between UNSW and India and Australia and India to greater heights, how we can strengthen it further in more sustainable, meaningful ways. It's been really great to be able to contribute to some of those discussions, and I think it's a great step towards reinvigorating our engagement with India in many different ways.
It's been a fantastic week. India Illuminated reflects UNSW's strong commitment to India. It's part of not only the India strategy, but what Professor Ian Jacobs refers to as the DIA initiative. I think the whole idea behind this festival, and it's the first time, it's the inaugural festival, is to create a sense of interest within the UNSW community, students, faculty, administration, and in Sydney, on the importance that higher education, UNSW, and India can play together. Had a fabulous week of various things, whether it's a health roundtable, discussions on economics, on politics, a discussion on Bollywood, looking at how perceptions can change, what's the state of India-Australia relations, Mehendi, flash dance, Bollywood dancing, cinema, a discussion on masterclass on cinema. I think we've covered an extraordinary gamut only as an appetizer for what could be and will be a strong UNSW India engagement. Thank you for being here.